You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in BioHealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk and CEO of BioHealth Innovation, helping to support the BioHealth capital region, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And our guest on BioTalk today is relatively new, but the company is not new to the region. And the company is BrainScope, located in Rockville, Maryland. And its CEO, Matt Adams, is joining us for BioTalk today. Matt, welcome.
Rich, thank you. Very excited and thankful for the opportunity to be here.
And we'll talk a little bit later about the other connections BrainScope has to the region. But Matt is going to give us an update on the progress the company has made over the last several years, and also talk about his introduction to BrainScope. But more importantly, rather than me read his bio or his resume, he's going to introduce himself to the listeners, talk about a little bit of how he evolved into the career he's in today. Matt, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm an engineer by training and have spent the last 25 years really dedicated to the med tech industry. And there's a little stint in biotech there, a little reference, but it's been a long and fruitful history of developing and then commercializing new products across the globe. I was fortunate, Rich, to be able to cut my teeth in different businesses in Medtronic early in my career, spent time in both their cardiac and neuro businesses. Went on to a urology business called American Medical Systems that we sold to Endo Pharmaceuticals, and then a series of startups, frankly. Spent time in an ophthalmology business that we ended up selling to Bausch & Lomb, and then my short stint in the biotech world was building out a microbiome therapeutics platform that ended up going to Ferring Pharmaceuticals before having a chance to build a portfolio in hemorrhagic stroke. So I've been very fortunate to generate some nice shareholder returns that were a little in excess of $1 billion and have a positive impact on lives across the globe, which was really the reason I came into medtech to begin with. So it's been a great run.
Thank you for that history in your career. It's really very interesting to see your evolution through the MedTech world. We have one of our entrepreneurs in residence spent many years with Medtronic. I don't know if you know Ethel Rubin. She used to be in business development with Medtronic.
My stint with Medtronic would have been in the early 2000s, and there was something on the order of 35,000 of us at that time. Unfortunately, I haven't met Ethel.
She was there prior to you being there. But anyway, she's one of our valued resources. And really, when you have one of the leading people in the med tech space in the world that you've worked for, it gives you a great background for what you're doing today, Matt. Let's talk a little bit about your evolution and your introduction to BrainScope. How did that occur? And why did you see this as your next interesting opportunity where you're going to bring great shareholder value to all the BrainScope shareholders?
That's a perfect segue, Rich. Thank you. So I had an opportunity to join BrainScope as a CEO in November of 2025. I'm still relatively new. And the mission was to really help scale the platform to help patients that are at risk for or currently suffering from a whole host of neuro diseases, things like traumatic brain injury, dementia, and a long list of diseases beyond that. And I think as we'll touch on, the business has been around for a while and is really built on a really solid foundation of clinical research and science. And we're at such an interesting time because between the evolution of technology and where the business is at, man, we're at a spot where we have a chance to really scale the platform and touch a lot of lives in a positive way. For me, seeing that confluence of technology and now done in a way that we can frankly be able to afford to offer a highly accessible, cutting-edge tool to the masses is pretty exciting.
That's great. Now that you're about 9 months in with BrainScope, what are some of the greatest revelations that have occurred to you over that 9-month period? And any surprises at all?
Well, it's a startup. There's always surprises. But I can tell you there's a couple of things that are really positive. One is the shareholder base the business has really been with it for a long time, has been extremely supportive. When BrainScope started, AI, and as we'll get into the products itself being point of care, EEG, these were things of myth, and the business was really far ahead of its time. Had the first FDA cleared AI-enabled product in the field of neurology. It's been a pioneer for a long time. And just the long-term support has been absolutely fantastic. That now in combination with the outreach that's coming to us, and frankly, even outside the US, so more and more sources across the globe, is certainly an exciting signal to the fact that the time is right. The neurospace has got big needs, and we have a real opportunity to have an impact. So been very excited to witness that and very thankful for the opportunity to lead the team.
Well, the moons are aligning over BrainScope in Rockville right now. Let's talk to the listeners a little bit about the science and technology of BrainScope.
Absolutely. So BrainScope is an AI or artificial intelligence-driven biomarker platform. Our core physiologic measure is EEG, or an electroencephalogram, brain electrical activity in layman's terms. And EEG, like EKG, which is the electrical activity for your heart, it's been around a long time. But there's a key difference when you go from the heart to the brain. The difference is that you can interpret that EKG signal visually if you're a clinician. You can look at that strip, read an electrical signal, and determine if the patient has an arrhythmia or some other cardiac issue going on. With EEG, you can identify a seizure, like you might have in the case of epilepsy. But other than that, you really can't interpret that signal without help. Remember, the brain is like your own personal supercomputer. That signal is super dense. And that's where BrainScope comes in, because our artificial intelligence can decode that EEG signal and provide users with the ability to either predict or diagnose or assess severity or even subtype a whole host of different neurodisorders. And with the confluence of technology that I referenced earlier, that whole process just takes a matter of minutes. You can be sitting on the side of a field or in a clinic, use our equipment. Our AI only requires about 2 minutes of signal for it to actually work and give you a super simple output and an action that you can take.
Well, basically, everybody's talking about AI today. You say AI enabled. I'd say 99% of our listeners don't know what AI enabled means. So can you go a little deeper into the AI component of your science and technology and why it's differentiated from a lot of the other technologies today?
Absolutely. So I say AI enabled because we'll start with that EEG signal that I referenced, so brain electrical activity, and we'll develop the AI specifically to turn that signal into a very simple clinical outcome type of a measure. As an example, we are already FDA cleared for head injury. So if you were to have a concussion, let's say you're a teenager on the football field, you get your bell rung. A lot of the standard of care today will be to some version of look at my finger, follow it as it goes back and forth, will assess whether you have a concussion. Very subjective measure. Instead of doing that, we can take a measure of your brain electrical activity. It takes about 2 minutes of that signal that I referenced, and our AI will be able to say, based on that decoding that I referenced, do you have a concussion or not? How severe is that concussion, which helps inform time to recovery? And then once you get in the clinic, we can actually objectively measure that recovery over time. And it's giving you that type of power in the form of a very simple output. Example being, if you were looking at that concussion example, you don't need a specialist to either acquire the signal or read it. There's no neurologist there reading a long strip of EEG. You get a score. And if that score is below 70 on this clinically validated scale, you have a concussion. If it's closer to 0, you have a very severe concussion. So our whole focus and differentiator, frankly, Rich, is to be able to take that level of technology and put it into a very affordable and highly accessible platform that, frankly, anybody could use.
And when you say platform, what's the physical device look like that basically enables you to do these readings almost real time?
So there's 2 components to it. You have the actual EEG sensor. So think about a headband that goes around your forehead connected to a phone platform. So in this case, we happen to be hardwired because we're running a pretty powerful AI on the phone itself. But with that technology, you put the headband on, engage the app that sits on, as I mentioned, a phone platform. The AI does its thing and gives you direction on what you should go think about doing next, an ever-increasing long list of neurodisorders.
Excellent. Well, basically, it sounds simplistic. It sounds cost-effective, too. Is this something that's much more affordable than the technology that's out there today that you compete against?
Great question. So the answer is it depends. If you're going up against many of the subjective measures, of course, those don't cost you very much. The challenge is they're also not very accurate. So often either diagnosing something way too late or missing it completely. And you can imagine the cost of that over the long haul is pretty expensive. When you look at bringing an AI-driven, very actionable, well-validated tool like we're bringing, or very cost-effective, where there are alternatives available, they may fall into an imaging category. So as a simple example, we'll get into dementia, I think, a little bit, which is a key focus in our portfolio today. If you're going through that process of being diagnosed with more objective tools for dementia today, you're likely to get a PET scan. So that's not cheap. And it also takes specialists. It also requires a lot of infrastructure, things of that nature. So when you weigh us against other objective tools, ease of use and cost, we're extremely affordable and very accessible.
Very interesting. Thank you for that background. And when we talk about competition, I guess it comes from many different parts of the world. And where do you see the greatest challenges you have with your technology today in this competitive environment?
That's a great question. So a little bit of this depends on the geography you're speaking about, but let's stay within the US, still the largest healthcare market on the planet. Often what can be viewed as competition is actually more complementary in our case. So let me give you an example. In the concussion environment, we're going to tend to be more, especially in the clinic that's serving, actually treating these concussion patients. We'll provide a very simple objective measure as to where you are in a scale. But that can easily complement what the clinician is using as their other assessment tools to give you a much more complete picture of what's going on with the patient. Now, in other environments, as an example, we're also FDA cleared to detect bleeds in your brain, so following like a traumatic brain injury. If you're in the field, if you're in rural medicine or field applications where you don't have imaging right around the corner, there really isn't competition. We're the only tool that can allow you to get a very quick read and support a transport decision. Where do I need to take that patient?
Basically, you talked about being the first FDA AI-enabled technology. How long did it take to go through the regulatory process with the FDA to get approval?
Our FDA track record has been really good. And as you mentioned, a pioneer in the space. So having the first FDA cleared AI-enabled tool in the field of neurology, our foray into that came in the form of a de novo. So those are not short-term exercises, as you probably know. We were able to successfully pioneer that process, receive our first clearance. That's actually the first of 8 clearances that the business has stacked up since then. And following that initial de novo clearance, we've, of course, became our own predicate and have established a series of 510K clearances for subsequent products or improvements in existing products since then. So how does that set the stage as we go forward? Well, there's 2 ways to think about this. One is that as our expanding pipeline continues to evolve, we've already got a very solid foundation with the FDA from which to operate. They're used to seeing how we approach algorithm development. They're used to seeing the infrastructure and architecture of the products developed around. We will definitely continue to leverage that experience. Those are largely based in our machine learning capabilities. So think about an earlier stage of how people thought about artificial intelligence. We'll continue certainly with those core capabilities. As we look forward, in addition to the 510K route, as things like in the dementia space, for example, as you may know, the number of therapies that are either available today or being actively developed in the dementia world, particularly Alzheimer's, is dramatically increasing. So just a few years ago, you really didn't have any therapeutic options. Today, there's 2 FDA-cleared drugs, long pipeline behind that. So how does that translate to people like a BrainScope? Well, in addition to focusing on CDRH with our traditional 510K clearances built on the de novo that I referenced, we can also begin to go down the path with CDER in how do you begin to gain additional clearances, for example, as a drug development tool.
So the difference being between medical devices and pharmaceutical.
Or direct clinical application and formal validation or formal clearance as a tool that can be used in the clinical trial world as patient selection or even a formal outcome measure. So great advancement for us there. And I can tell you one of the areas that we are in development on and certainly intend to continue to be a pioneer around is deep learning. And we've got now in development and it works. Basically, we took a large language model type infrastructure. So if you're used to using ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, something like that, instead of predicting the next word in a sentence, we've modified that so we're able to predict the next sequence in an EEG and then link that back to a whole host of diseases. So we've built a database now of 170,000 patient records. It's about 100,000 hours of EEG, and built a model, as I just described, on deep learning techniques. So why is this relevant to your FDA question? Because machine learning in the FDA is a well-trodden path. We have a great track record there. Deep learning in regulatory agencies is a bit of a frontier, and will continue to stay on the frontier as we develop models and tools that perform at ever higher levels.
Congratulations on your 8 clearances and the work you're doing with the FDA. And listeners, I'm talking with Matt Adams, by the way, who's the CEO for BrainScope, located in Rockville, Maryland. You mentioned deep learning, and that's something that a lot of people probably have not heard the term deep learning, Matt. Could you go a little deeper, no play on words, about the meaning of deep learning for our listeners?
Think about it like a real evolution of, and frankly, if we go too deep into this topic, we want to bring on our technical leaders to handle this one. So be careful, Rich.
We're not going to do that because you don't have to go that deep with me.
So here's the layman's answer to that. In very simplistic terms, our traditional machine learning algorithms may leverage hundreds to thousands of features when it's developing a model to assess whether you have a concussion or determine whether you have a brain bleed. When we move into a deep learning environment, we can go now into millions of features and detect even more subtle differences between normal and disease states, or even within disease states, start to talk about heterogeneity that you might not be able to see with any other method. In addition, those models aren't necessarily, you don't have to provide the same level of context or background on an individual patient for it to be able to detect something's up and here's what's likely to be up. So it gives you a whole nother level of performance. And in our world, that gets to things like sensitivity, specificity, the ability to define heterogeneity within different disease cases and continue to solve really basic clinical problems.
BrainScope's got a platform technology. It has many different application areas. So as a CEO, Matt, how do you decide which areas to focus on? Because as an early stage company, you only have limited resources and you can't be all things to all people. So how do you make those decisions with your team about what direction to go next when you have so many different ways to go?
We start with a very basic filter that just because we can assess or diagnose a condition, technically we may be able to solve the problem. But if that's not going to drive a differentiated clinical action, is there not someone in the environment, whether it's a payer or whether it's an individual that is willing to pay for that, we're probably not going to spend a tremendous amount of time developing it. And that's as much about making sure you're putting out information that is going to provide the highest utility as anything.
And you just mentioned one of the critical words, because if I'm an investor or a venture capitalist today and I'm looking at new biohealth or life science companies to invest in, first of all, there's got to be a market. But second of all, somebody has to pay for the technology. So you mentioned reimbursement and payers. Talk about that environment that you deal with every day and how it impacts the decisions you make with the technologies you're developing and hoping to market to improve quality of health.
Well, as I'm sure you're well aware, Rich, it used to be just getting through the FDA to get regulatory clearance or approval, depending on the path you're on. That was the peak of the mountain. And today, that's often not the case. The peak is about what do you need to do to get reimbursement established. And so we pay a lot of attention to that. We're really in the category of continuing to build out the data set for establishing utility. So in the payer world, there's always coding, coverage, and payment. We're through that first gate, and we're very much into engaging and building the utility argument at scale. So from the payer's world, 100% something you've got to absolutely pay attention to, and we, of course, do. The unique thing about our platform is that in addition to clinical channels like this, there's in the concussion environment, as a very simple example, there are other avenues that don't reside underneath our traditional healthcare reimbursement plan, like NCAA sports, ultimately professional sports. Those exist outside of the traditional healthcare reimbursement world and, of course, are pretty attractive. So we like to pay close attention to those opportunities as well.
There's 3 major things investors are looking at, and that's the regulatory environment, of course, your differential advantage, your reimbursement, and then intellectual property. Talk a little bit about the intellectual property around your platform and what you do to protect that.
As we've discussed, I joined late 2025, so kind of went through my own diligence process. And one of the things that really stands out about BrainScope is the intellectual property is rock solid. So there's 83 issued global patents. They're very broad, right? And they cover algorithms, hardware, disease states. It's been very well constructed, and we nurture that and continue to expand it through the typical channels, whether that's continuing coverage on work we already have or with an innovation-based company, as you'd expect, there's a steady flow of new IP that gets filed. So that portfolio is an ever-living and ever-expanding thing.
Everything costs money too, doesn't it, Matt?
It does.
How do you find the environment right now? Because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, early stage, mid-stage, growth stage, talking about some of the challenges in the financial markets these days. So how do you view the financial markets, and how do you look to the future for providing the finances necessary for BrainScope's continued growth?
I'd love to tell you that fundraising was just easier than it's ever been, but that wouldn't be true. We're out constantly seeking new partners. I would say one of the big bonuses that BrainScope has, as I referenced earlier, is we've got a very dedicated group of investors that have been with the business for a while and are just rock solid. So for us, it's more about how do we bring in additional support to really scale at an even faster pace. And we're certainly living in the frothy AI environment and continuing to build up partnerships and new opportunities to generate that investment and scale even more quickly.
So for the BrainScope investors that are listening to this podcast, you've made a very good decision, and I think you should stick with it. You've got great leadership and good technology to lead, and you're in one of the leading biohealth regions in the United States right here, located in Rockville, Maryland. So let's talk about the future a little bit, Matt. And, one of the things we passed over is that BrainScope does have a history of visibility within the biohealth capital region because it won the crab trap competition in 2020, which is at the annual BioHealth Capital Region Forum, which is coming up again September 15th through 17th. So we welcome you to join and give everybody a little update as to where your growth is. And by the way, there's an investment conference component to that on September the 17th, where we invite companies looking to raise money, whether it's now or into the future. We have about 30 investors registered right now, and it's free, and it's one-on-one meetings between investors and companies looking for money and investors that have money. So if that's something that fits, take a look at the investment conference agenda, and if you wanted to apply, you would be welcome to apply because we know that you would be very worthy of being in the investment conference on September 17th. So let's talk about major milestones for the future. What do you see as the next major 3 to 5 year goals for the company? And I'm sure the investors that are listening would be glad to hear that too.
Absolutely. Well, and Rich, as you know, I look forward to seeing you on the 17th. So,
okay, very good.
We'll have a good chat there. Let me step back for a second and maybe give you a little bit of the transformation that the business has gone through since winning the crab trap in 2020. And then we'll segue into where we're going because it has really been an exciting story. So as I referenced, we are at a very unique time in history where you can take the power of artificial intelligence today, apply it to something like point of care EEG, where we can read your brain electrical activity in minutes, and not only give you guidance on what you may be suffering from or at risk for, but do it in a way that literally from affordability and accessibility perspective, ultimately we'll be able to deploy anywhere around the planet in any environment. You don't necessarily need to be in a clinical setting. So the fact that we've evolved to the point where we have that sort of horsepower, like literally at your fingertips, is just an amazing time in history to be able to engage with a business like this. So let's go back to the crab trap moment in 2020. The business has really come from being a single product point of care EEG business that had a very novel biomarker that could detect brain bleeds like we talked about before. And that's still a powerful tool. It's 99% sensitive down to like a single cubic centimeter of blood. So a very sensitive tool. But we've gone from that single product host to building out the platform like we talked about. And the theme of that platform is it being about affordable, accessible, and objective measures of brain health for a whole host of different diseases. So we've talked about head injury, alluded a little bit to dementia, and that's going to come back in a second as we talk about the future. I touched on 170,000 patient database that we've collected and are modeling on. That includes neurodegenerative disease, things like Parkinson's, stroke, handful of different psych disorders, migraines, and so on. So big expansion from single product to platform with a large multi-disease database. The 8 FDA clearances we talked about are in the US. In addition, the business has expanded to having clearance in Saudi Arabia and Canada. And we're frankly in early discussions around entry into Asian markets. So global expansion has been a big theme. We've continued to publish cutting-edge research in the field. So 37 peer-reviewed publications over the life of the platform. 2 of those are in JAMA. And our most recent one came out earlier this year in Nature Scientific Reports. And this transitions to the comment on the future. That Nature Scientific Reports article talks about the algorithm that we've already developed that allows us to predict the onset of dementia up to 7 years before standard of care or typical clinical diagnosis today.
Can I be tested?
Absolutely. You'd be surprised the number of folks that ask that exact question. I want to know where I'm at. And can I
I'm
do
sure.
something now? Yeah. So the next big move for us is an entry into the Alzheimer's space. We've been published for that algorithm. Have to give a big shout out to the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. That for those that know the dementia world, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation is a bedrock, have really supported development of therapeutics and diagnostics.
I'll tell you what, the disease foundations are stepping up now because with some reductions in the NIH funding, you either have to try to get money from the private sector or the disease foundations are stepping up to fill some of those gaps. And I'm glad that Alzheimer's is helping assist you in your growth.
And that partnership for us has just been absolutely fantastic, and we'll continue to build that. So to the future, where do we go? This is about expansion to additional disease states. So we alluded to dementia being the next up. Following our ability to predict, we also have demonstrated through proof of concept that we can track longitudinally, so showing changes in severity. You can imagine what that does if you're someone trying to develop a therapy and you want a much more objective marker of, is my drug working or not, or my device working or not? So that's already actively in development, along with what we call subtyping. For those that know the dementia space, you'll realize that that is a host of different diseases, predominantly Alzheimer's, but there are other forms of dementia, whether it's Lewy body or vascular dementia and so on. Clinically, those can be very hard to separate. And we've proven again, proof of concept, that we can separate those different disease states just by combining RAI with EEG. Beyond that, there's a wellness application and consumer applications that begin to follow. And that wellness application built on the large database that I referenced, more than 100,000 hours of EEG, allows us to assess an individual against a whole host of different disease states. That's built on our deep learning technology. It runs today in development mode and gives you a great glimpse as to the power of the platform as we continue to advance.
Well, I'm glad you've given me that past crab trap winning scenario where you are today, because you just practiced your elevator pitch with me for the investors, Matt, on everything that's just occurred and where you're going in the future.
There you go. We nailed it.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want the listeners to know about BrainScope or the technology today?
Boy, is there. We could spend all afternoon. It's like a favorite topic. The core message is we're not that far away from being able to ask on a fairly routine basis, have you had your brain scoped today? And that goes all the way from whether it's concussion right now to dementia that's coming to the wellness platform that I talked about. It's really starting to become a basic vital sign for a whole host of different diseases that are neurocentric. If you're a clinician focused on concussion or sports medicine, we should be partnering up. If you're an athletic director or a trainer, high school, collegiate sports, even professional sports, we should be partnering up. If you're an investor that wants to play a role in revolutionizing where brain health can go, we should be partnering up.
So if I want to partner up with you, how do I get in touch with you?
There's 2 ways you can do that. You can email us at info@brainscope.com, or you can check us out at brainscope.com.
If I want to get to you personally, though, Matt, how do I get to you?
Well, if you want to go straight at me, you can go matt.adams@brainscope.com.
There you go. Now, I like a CEO who's visible and he's willing to entertain direct communication with the people interested in your technology and your company. So I appreciate everything you've given the listeners today on education related to BrainScope, new technologies in the neuro space, and really with where we're focused in the BioHealth Capital Region. We're going to be talking a little bit at this forum this year on the 15th and 16th about AI and quantum technologies and applications and how you use those technologies. we should have probably talked sooner, or maybe it's not too late to get you on a panel. I don't know. Andy's probably cringing saying, Rich, you're going to invite one more person to get on a panel where we don't have room. But having people who are actually using these new technologies today that actually gone through the FDA process, there aren't that many companies that we can talk to. So I think getting more visibility for BrainScope in that September 15th through 17th timeframe would be very good for this region to know that we've got a leader in its field that resides right here in Rockville. So Matt Adams, CEO for BrainScope, thank you for being on BioTalk today. And we'll definitely see you in about a month in Rockville.
Rich, I'm looking forward to it. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.